Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Centre for Legal Innovation's new free webinar series, Reinvented Legal Businesses, the Case Studies. I'm Terri Mottershead, the Executive Director of the Centre, and I'll be your facilitator for this session. I wanted to spend, because it is our first one, just a couple of minutes on talking about the purpose of the new series. It has really come from feedback from folks that we work with at the Centre who have been looking for case studies, a proof of concept, or if you like, examples of how new legal businesses have come to being and also how they operate. So this series is about showcasing those legal businesses. That they might be reimagined, repurposed, or reinvented, whatever the case may be, but all of the businesses that we'll be showcasing, and Sparqa Legal being no exception to that, are really contributing to, but also in many respects creating the new legal ecosystem that we find ourselves with. So you're going to have those examples, you're going to have those proofs of concept, if you like, along the way as we work our way through this series. Let me introduce you to our two presenters today for Sparqa Legal. It is our inaugural case study, so it's kind of a big one, and we're very excited to be welcoming you, Andy Thornton QC from London, UK, and also you, Stuart Hohnen from Australia. It's great to not just have you here, but to be talking about a business that is already truly global. And to see how that kind of works across continents, much less countries as well. So Andy and Stu are going to take us on their journey, and it's not really just of one legal business, although we'll be focusing on one. It's really one legal business within a group of entrepreneurial enterprises. They're going to chat about how these came to be and also how they're different or differentiate themselves in the market. So you're going to have an intro from these folks, an overview, a demo of their businesses, and then we'll jump into questions too. So with that introduction being done, Andy and Stu, we really are delighted to welcome you to the series, and thank you very much for being our inaugural case study and kicking the series off for us. And over to you.
Thanks, Terri. So I'm Andrew. I'm going to start taking you through the history of how we ended up launching the two businesses that we're concentrating on today. So FromCounsel and Sparqa Legal. They really derive from a business that we launched in 2007 called cpdcast.com. And that was an early podcasting business. My background is as a corporate barrister practicing in London, and together with a couple of my friends, we launched a business that was to provide legal training, continuing professional development training to lawyers by podcast. So we built a fairly basic software platform. We built an even more basic recording studio using egg boxes and things like that, and started to record 30-minute question and answer podcasts. And essentially what we would do is reach out to experts in different areas of law, bring them into our very hot, unair-conditioned recording studio, ask them a series of questions, record them, edit them back, and then put up a 30-minute podcast that people could listen to either on their PCs or at that stage on iPods. So it was pre-iPhone generation, so the way in which you could listen to a podcast is much more restricted. And if you finish listening to the podcast and answered a quick quiz, you get a single qualifying point for your continuing professional development. And that business launched in 2007, and we found it had two peaks. We would tend to find in London we have a split profession, barristers and solicitors. The 12-month period, qualifying period for continuing professional development for solicitors ended in October, and for barristers in December. And we found that we would take most of our revenue in the last week of October and the last 2 days of December. That business sold to a company called Informa PLC, which is a FTSE 100 listed company in London in 2010. But the key thing that came out of that business was that for regulatory purposes, we had to have the podcasts transcribed. And when we got the transcripts back and saw the question and answer style on the page, we felt that it was a really good way of transferring legal knowledge. At that stage, we were still really with print textbooks. It was the pre-digital age in many respects. And we felt that consuming information through a series of short question answers was far better than long chapters, particularly when we applied our minds to how legal information data would appear on a screen rather than on a page. At the same time as running that business, we had a joint venture with a company called Practical Law Company, which is now owned by Thomson Reuters. That it was and still remains, I think it's fair to say, the leading provider of knowledge services to law firms in the UK. And we would provide our podcast to them and they would provide them to their subscribers. Once we'd sold CPDcast, we started to think a little bit about how the question and answer format might be used to convey corporate law knowledge. So my chambers in London practices corporate law. We do M&A work and director's duties, that sort of thing. And we felt that there was a market for a digital, deeply analytical legal knowledge service. I suspect it's the same throughout the world, but certainly in London, the move within the legal sector is for lawyers to become less expert in the law, but more expert in actually doing things, carrying out tasks. So there's been a little bit of de-skilling in some respects with the law firms in terms of their knowledge. And so we felt that it was an opportunity for us to launch a business that the law firms could use to find their legal knowledge. So textbooks are, of course, were fantastic, but in an era where most lawyers are tech savvy and look to a digital solution first, we felt that the time was right to launch a really deeply analytical knowledge service, and that is FromCounsel, which we launched in 2016, Q4 2016. And at the moment, we have about 80% of the leading UK law firms signed up to it. They consume about 5 million words of corporate law knowledge, legislation, a news service, and so forth. And Stu's just going to take you through that and give you a very quick demo of what that business currently looks like.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Stuart Hohnen. I'm the General Counsel at Sparqa Legal and at FromCounsel. And just to reiterate what Andy said at the start, so FromCounsel really emerged from this sort of insight through CPDcast that the Q&A format provided something that, that perhaps wasn't there in the market in any sort of at any scale, and that was sort of formed the basis for developing the FromCounsel service, and FromCounsel, I guess, is differentiated primarily through the association with Erskine Chambers, or at least a subset of the barristers at Erskine Chambers. So it is fundamentally about bringing barristers and solicitors. So in the UK market, there's a category of solicitor called a professional support lawyer. They tend to be the more technically minded solicitors, and they often have spent some time in practice and then sort of go into the professional support role because they enjoy engaging with the law a little bit more rather than running transactions, at least in the corporate context. And so bringing the barristers and the solicitors together to write content sort of comes at the problem from two different ends. And so the barristers obviously approach legal problems from the perspective of a barrister thinking about how a judge might construe legislation or a contract or cases or whatever it is. The PSLs, like all good lawyers, tend to build from the foundations, so they sort of look at the content and work upwards, whereas the barristers tend to work down because you obviously don't pay them to spend weeks and weeks researching a particular point. So I think it's the combination of that, the sort of insight that the barristers have, and the sort of professional support lawyer rigor, for want of a better word, that sort of makes the content sort of unmatched in the market. So it's really about that blend of the skills and experience of these two subsets within the legal profession. And as Andy mentioned, the service provides Q&A content, so 5 million words of Q&A content, precedent documents, and integrated legislation, and a daily news service. So the daily news service is basically the channel through which our content team and the barristers can give insights into developments in corporate law, whether it's cases or upcoming legislative changes. And then there is a separate market service which is run by our public company team, which is focused on public M&A and IPOs and secondary offerings. So if I just switch over and show you the... So this is the landing page of FromCounsel. You can see up here you've got your Q&A, legislation, precedents and markets, which are the sort of 4 key bits of the service. And then within the Q&A button, you've got a whole bunch of subject areas within corporate law. And so, for example, if I was to go into capital maintenance and then go into the Q&A, you would see there's this sort of commences with a set of more general question and answers, so explaining what's in the chapter and the basic principles. So in this case, what is a reduction of capital, and then how the Companies Act regulates that. So really sort of the bedrock stuff, and then it will go into a lot more detail. So for example, this is just a bit of a... If I was to type in a search, I'm actually just finding a way to this particular case because it's Vodafone, because it's useful to show the depth of the content. So this question 89, can a publicly traded company rely on non-public information to satisfy the court that there is no real likelihood of prejudice to its creditors by reason of a capital reduction? And what this is trying to demonstrate is that kind of blend of the barristers and the solicitors. So with that combination, we're able to provide a lot of detail and analysis about what the cases say. In this case, it was Vodafone Group PLC, and also to draw the reader's attention to the views of our editorial team, which is the barristers and the solicitors. So we're able to express views about particular points of law that may be uncertain, have not been decided by cases, or are unclear from the legislation. So one of the key sort of value adds within this service is that we're trying to sort of bring the barrister expertise to a wider audience than might otherwise be able to access it, because obviously you would ordinarily need to go and instruct a barrister to get that kind of insight. There's then our legislation service, which just incorporates the legislation that we refer to through the service. The precedents, so you can download a sale and purchase agreement or an NDA, a whole range of different sort of board packs, for example, so capital reductions, share buybacks, those sorts of things. And then the market service, which provides in particular analytics about what is happening in the public markets. So you can see average deal values, things like the amount of fees charged by the advisors, the types of deals, the structure. So for practitioners in public M&A, it's providing them with useful insights that they can then feed in to the advice that they provide to their clients. And I guess the fundamental thing that FromCounsel was trying to tackle at the start is the same that Sparqa Legal is trying to tackle, and we'll come on to that in a second, but that is just the quality of the information that is available to practitioners. So if we can improve the quality of the information that's available within the market, then that should feed through to the efficiency and the quality of the services that the market are able to provide to the public. So just switching back to our... So that's FromCounsel. And it was through the development of the FromCounsel service and sort of in parallel, because I think the Sparqa Legal concept was alive and well fairly early on in the process. So I think Andy originally had intended to develop two different products, one that was designed for law firms and one that was designed for the broader market. But certainly the experience of building FromCounsel and structuring the content and the sort of technology involved with presenting that content was directly relevant to the sort of follow-on process of building a different product, but a similar product for the SME market. So the problem that Sparqa Legal is trying to tackle is a pretty well-known one. I think it's commonly discussed, and that is, put simply, smaller businesses find it harder to access, quality legal advice in a cost-effective way, and so that is fundamentally what we're trying to tackle with Sparqa Legal. And there are sort of three different elements to, we see three different broad elements to the solution to that problem. One is the point that I've already identified, which is improving the quality of the information that's available, and that really is the low-hanging fruit for us, because we're just taking information that already exists, to a large degree, and just presenting it in a way that is accessible for SMEs and smaller businesses. And to sort of draw your attention to a particular part of that, it involved, while we adopted the Q&A format for Sparqa Legal, the voice, so the way that we sort of wrote the content was actually quite different, as you can imagine, for FromCounsel, because the end market is solicitors. We were able to just write, and as long as it's well written and contains all of the analysis, the lawyers sort of gobble it up. Whereas the SME market, with people who are less sophisticated in terms of legal knowledge, they may not have any experience in terms of lawyers or trying to consume legal information. So the information, or the way that you present the information to this category of customers, is very different. And so we have to sort of start at a much more basic level, and then build up, and then try and keep away from the depths of analysis that might have appeared in the FromCounsel product, because frankly, people just want the answer, expressed in simple terms. They don't want reams and reams of commentary. So the products are very, come from a kind of common core, but they are fundamentally different in that way. The second aspect to the product is trying to provide access to legal advice. So there is still going to be a human element. I know there is an enormous amount of focus on AI and automated solutions that sort of remove the human from the equation. But the good thing for us lawyers is that, at least for the time being, that human element will remain incredibly important. And, for us, the experience with Sparqa Legal has been that, our product was originally just the information, and there is a category of customer who wants to self-help, and they want to find the answer, and they want to resolve their own legal issues. But there is a much deeper tail within the market that actually does need help, and they need someone to sort of hold their hand, even if it's just to check something, or check a document, or check a conclusion that they've drawn from the information. So providing easy access to quality legal advice in a cost-effective way is an extremely important part of the overall picture for addressing the SME problem. And then separately, it's bringing all those together in one place, and on your iPhone, that kind of thing, so that people who are running businesses and running around their warehouse or running around their shop can do things easily, and can sort of solve their own problems when they feel comfortable doing that, and then can access, lawyers when they feel that they need some additional help. So just to sort of skip back to so you can see on Sparqa Legal, so this is our site, and it's broken into 13 different areas, so HR, sales and commercial agreements, operating a website, so all of the kind of nuts and bolts of running a small business. And we have structured the content in a very different way. So let's say, for example, I go into sort of staff contracts. This is going to be, it's not the sort of the textbook on employment law. It's more practical things like, am I required to have a written, agreement with my workers? And then a series of documents you can see over here on the right. They're the related documents. So it might be a consultancy agreement or an employment contract. And those documents then feed through into, document automation, so that you fill out a questionnaire, and out pops a document at the end, which you can then use. So that's the sort of information side of Sparqa Legal. And then separately, there is the sort of first step that we've taken down the road to addressing this issue of access to legal services. And currently, it's through the Ask a Lawyer service, where people can post questions through the site. And then we will then triage that question and then put them in contact with a direct access barrister. And obviously this is the area where I think there will be a lot of development in future, as well as we start to broaden the base of lawyers who can provide advice through the service, and also potentially start to offer our own services, under a separate regulated entity that could provide some of the legal advice on the more straightforward matters, but still having access to specialists when required. So that is the two sites. I think the main thing for us is that this is part of a journey, and we've taken sort of big steps towards trying to bring these different elements together: the information, the legal services, and the platform. But to a large degree, it's very much a discovery process. There are a large number of people who are sort of operating, a large number of businesses who are trying to tackle this space, but because there is this sort of inertia on the customer side and inertia on the supply side, it will be very, very interesting to kind of see how it evolves in future as some of these businesses start to get more penetration, and as people's expectation about what they can achieve online for themselves starts to change, as they see some of these services and realise that actually, for an employment contract, they don't need to go to a lawyer. They can actually, for most garden variety employment contracts, they could produce it themselves. So I think there's going to be a big change, in the way that in the way that the market perceives these sorts of services over the next sort of 3, 4, 5 years. So that is Sparqa and FromCounsel.
And Stu, could I just as Andrew, can I just jump in and make a point about the follow-on work? So as Stu's rightly described, at the moment, Sparqa's principal offering is a digital offering for SMEs wanting to do things themselves. The next challenge for the market and for our product is going to be the follow-on work. And we feel that SMEs ought to be able to acquire or seek and obtain legal advice for something much closer to £50 to £75 per hour. I'm always going to talk in sterling. At the moment, if you go to a small law firm as an SME, you're going to be charged 150, if you're lucky, 200, £250 per hour. And we think that sort of the digital world has provided the opportunity for those services to be provided much more cheaply. And it's really a result of scale. With a digital product, compared to a small law firm located in a particular geographical location, it's going to be far easier to get more people through the door. And one of the reasons why law firms have to charge so much is that any individual practitioner, even a specialist practitioner, has to cover quite a wide range of work, and therefore can't become incredibly specialist at any one task. Whereas if you have a much bigger customer base, it becomes much more possible to have specialists for each task. And so Stu took you to the reductions of capital section and FromCounsel. There's no reason why a much larger scale business can't have a specialist who knows absolutely everything there is to know about reductions of capital, and therefore can essentially deal with almost any issue that can arise on that sort of transaction without any further research. And what we're finding with Sparqa is that partners are content to distribute it to their user base. So the way we've built the user base on Sparqa has been through partnerships. So our three key partnerships at the moment are with two challenger banks, Starling and Revolut, and with Vodafone, the mobile phone business. So they offer Sparqa to all of their business handset users. And so if you think about the scale of that, there's no reason why you can't have a sort of funnel with several 100,000 potential customers who will pick up the phone or send an email when they have the odd issue here and there. And because the scale is so large, there's no reason why that particular specialist on whatever the particular task may be can't be fully occupied just dealing with that specialist task. So we feel with that sort of model, we can massively drive down the cost of providing human, direct, bespoke legal advice to customers. And that is pretty transformational if it happens, because if you're an SME, one of the greatest fears about instructing a lawyer is the sort of what we always call the taximeter problem, that you don't quite know how much it's going to cost. You start speaking to somebody and then 3 or 4 more issues arise. And suddenly, before you know it, you've got a bill for a few £1,000s, a few $1,000s, which may be unaffordable for an SME. So we're very much aiming to drive, firstly, the rate down, but also then offer innovative subscription services. So we can actually say to somebody, well, you can call us up to X number of times per month for a fixed fee. And we think that that will be an attractive proposition for SMEs, because as Stu rightly said, a digital service is fantastic, but sometimes when you've got an issue, you just want to be reassured by somebody telling you that you're doing the right thing, or what you should do, or that you haven't got anything to worry about. And that is an important element still of the offering. But we want to be able to offer that at a price that SMEs feel that they can make use of it and not be scared to pick up the phone because they fear that the costs are going to run away with themselves.
And the point about scale is well made, and I think it's best, using examples. I mean, when I was in practice, I might have seen dozens or maybe hundreds of non-disclosure agreements, but I didn't see thousands of them. And once you reach that scale where someone is dealing with a single document all the time, and you can start to look at compare documents, you can look at the data, you can find ways of streamlining the process for taking in an NDA and then amending it and sending it back out. And it's that scale that is what will drive the reduction in the unit cost for the end users.
Yeah, and also the other point about that is that, of course, it starts to bring in the possibility of using technology. So, I mean, one of the businesses I sat on the board of was a company called SwiftKey, which invented this sort of predictive text keyboard, and was sold to Microsoft about 4 years ago. And that business provided a keyboard to most of the handset users, bar Apple, so Sony, BlackBerry, and so forth. And if you and there we were predicting the next word when you typed, but we were able to do that because we had access to every keystroke on every handset sold by those manufacturers. So it was a vast data pool. One of the issues that is holding back the application of artificial intelligence and other tools. In the legal sector is lack of data. You can't draw meaningful data from 200 NDAs. You need to have thousands of them. And so if this scale does bring an opportunity for, in due course, the application of prediction engines and artificial intelligence, so that perhaps there becomes sort of, again, an opportunity to drive down the time spent to provide advice and therefore ultimately the cost for the end user.
And there's another point on the, you know, the AI issue is that, as they say, you know, if you put poor data in, you get poor results out. And so I think, you know, the foundation of AI in the legal profession has to be focusing on getting the right data, so that to the extent that it is possible in future for us to have automated advisors, for example, who go, oh, you've typed in an employment law issue, and you know this machine goes through the corpus of information that it has and gives you an answer. That's only going to work if the corpus of information is exceptionally good. So I think, you know, that's one of the key things, is that people are very focused on the tech and the AI, and there's very good reason for that, because the potential is absolutely there, but we can't get too far ahead of ourselves in the sense that we need to, you know, have the data to go along with the tech. So focusing on how we collect and analyze legal data at sufficient volumes is going to be a really important part of the puzzle in terms of improving the experience for smaller businesses and other end users.
So I wanted to, well, firstly, just say thank you very much, and to continue to point people to the bottom of the screen for the Q&A. But just ask you a quick question on that point, because I suppose if you're looking particularly at the larger law firms, they have the opportunity to build something like Sparqa internally. But I guess the thing against that is exactly the point that you were just making, in that the documentation that they look at, unless they've got volume on that documentation, will not have the same sort of pass through that you would have in terms of this platform. And I'm asking the question partly in this way for this reason. Does that mean, in terms of firms that might tap in and use a platform such as your own, it's more the small to medium-sized firms? Or is it also the larger law firms, because that just makes better economic sense for them to be tapping into something like this platform as well? And the question's to either of you, yeah.
So it's Andrew. So I mean, I think the reality is, I mean, it may be different in other jurisdictions, but I suspect it's not. But the big law firms in the UK tend to seek the work that pays the high hourly rate. So I mean, it's not uncommon for even an associate now in London to be charging the best part of £500 an hour, and those sorts of rates are just impossible for an SME. It just doesn't work. I mean, unless you're a sort of VC-backed, fast growth technology business aiming for a sort of unicorn status where you're trying to protect your IP or something like that. That you're not in the market for that sort of lawyer. Those guys are always going to want to specialize on large transactions or large pieces of litigation where they can charge multiple hours at a high rate. And that sort of market isn't really where we are. We see really the interest being helping either small law firms or even individual practitioners who can and want to advise the smaller companies, the smaller businesses. So we see smaller law firms using this as an opportunity to access those the SMEs. So, I mean, if you take an example of, and again, I'm always going to go back to the UK, if you take an example of a small law firm who is based in say, Birmingham, at the moment, it's very difficult for them to access clients who might be in London, for example, because geographically their reach doesn't extend. But they may be exactly the right lawyers to advise a particular client that's based in London. And so one of the opportunities we have is to remove that geographical barrier, so that if you are that, that you are the right person for the job, but you're not local to the customer. That shouldn't matter going forward. But we think also creating the opportunity for people to practice outside the constraints of a law firm. So I use Stu as an example. Stu, practiced in London for a long time, moved back to Melbourne. In principle, there's no reason why somebody like Stu, and I'm not trying to tempt him away from his role with us, but somebody like Stu could go back to Melbourne and still practice in the UK, and so use a platform to access work from clients, and in fact provide a really interesting service, because he can of course work when the UK is asleep. So I think there's a real opportunity for individuals who perhaps want to practice on their own, or maybe a small bunch of people who will just simply say, well, I can use this platform to pick up work, and I can choose to do, we figure there'll be some people who will say, well, I want to work full time. There'll be others who say, well, I want to work while the kids are at school. There might be others who say, well, I want to work 6 months a year and travel for 6 months a year. And those sorts of arrangements are quite difficult within a law firm, but there's no reason why individuals couldn't practice in that way. So we see really this being creating opportunity for small law firms and perhaps individual lawyers, and we think it's a different market from the sort of the large law firm market, who will continue to concentrate on the much larger end of the enterprise sector.
But it's also combining together a bunch of things that have also been done separately. Like there's been the talent platforms that you were just speaking to, Andy, but there's also been the legal research platforms, if you like, and the Q&A platforms. So the thing about this, in a way, the eloquence of this is that there's a potential, as you were saying earlier, to combine all of those things in one.
Yeah, because if you're one of the things that will worry. Let me take an example of, so we'll use Stu again. Stu goes back to Melbourne and wants to start doing work in London. How does he ensure that he keeps up to date with legal developments? How does he get a second opinion on something? I mean, one of the things, as we all do as lawyers, is we'll chat with our colleagues about a particular issue, and what do they think, second guess the advice that you're proposing to give. That becomes difficult. And so once you come out of a law firm, or if you're in a smaller firm that perhaps doesn't subscribe to all the services around it, you can become quite, number one, there's a danger that you'll just simply be unaware of a development in the law, but secondly, you become, I think, quite nervous about advising. And actually the route to unlocking the cheaper rates for and lowering the cost of the provision of legal advice for SMEs is going to be having people who are specialists in something, who know the area, and therefore can deal with matters really quite efficiently. Because if you can, if Stu is, for example, sounds like he wants to be a specialist in non-disclosure agreements. Stu becomes Mr. Non-Disclosure Agreement and is able to pick up lots of work in that sector. He will be able to do that very, very efficiently, which keeps the cost down for the end user, but also enables him to earn a rather handsome, income. So this doesn't have to be a sort of, cost lowered to the benefit of the client at the expense of the lawyer. It seems to me that if you can provide a way in which you match supply and demand better, everybody should win. And of course, maybe the risk is the losers really are the landlords in the city centres that no longer necessarily are able to let massive buildings to law firms. But there's no reason why I don't see this as a lawyer against clients sort of debate. It seems to me that lawyers can be much more efficient, get more work that they can do, and fortuitously keep the cost down for the ultimate client.
And it's also about making, the resources that are available outside the big, well-equipped, rich, law firms better or comparable, because larger law firms, because they're this aggregation of people and intellectual property, and they accrue a lot of value in that way. And so I think part of the solution to addressing the other end of the market is to equip the people outside the large law firm model with a better set of tools, a better set of information, better documents, so that they can sort of, not necessarily compete on exactly the same level as a lawyer in a large law firm, but at least, significantly raise the standard of what they're able to provide their customers. So it's a kind of like it's kind of like equalizing or trying to equalize the resources that are available to all solicitors, whether they're in a big firm or not.
There's a question here, which I'm going to read to both of you and address it to both of you. And it focuses particularly on using your solution for the SME market directly. So how are you intending to market your solution to the SME market who see legal as a grudge purchase? So I guess it's like, how do you get the folks to self-help is my shorthand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I mean when we were thinking about launching Sparqa, that was always the challenge, and it remains the challenge. We always knew we could write the content and build a software platform. The challenge was always going to be, number one, how do you get to the underlying customer, and number two, how do you persuade them to use it and to have confidence in using it. And we took the view that the partnership route was the best way to the market. So instead of saying, and we do a bit of SEO and all that sort of stuff, but what we sort of said is, well, there are who already has a relationship with SMEs. So they all have accountants, because most of them they have to provide annual accounts. They generally have a bank account. They will generally have sort of a business mobile phone. So we started hitting the challenger banks and people like that. So that's our route to market. So we have different sorts of deals with different people. So with Vodafone, with Starling, with Revolut, they all offer a slightly different proposition. But we see that being the route. So as and when you open a business bank account, one of the things you get is access to the Sparqa Legal platform. And in terms of getting people to use it, I mean, that's probably where we see the biggest challenge at the moment, is persuading people that they can have sufficient confidence, both in our content, but also in themselves, to do things themselves. And we think that's the ultimate challenge. But one of the reasons we're looking when we started, we thought that people would embrace it. Perhaps we're a bit over optimistic. So we see this very much as providing that ability for people to pick up the phone to us and say, I'm just looking at this. This is what I think. Can I just bounce that off you? Or, I've got this problem. What do I do? And so offering that ability to speak to somebody, but drive that price down, so that either they know that they can commit to a, say £75 a month and have 4 or 5 calls with us, or when they pick up the phone and start the meter running, it's running at a sort of rate of about 40% of what they pay for a law firm, and it's a manageable number. So we see, there probably will be a period where we do have quite a lot of people who do things themselves and are quite happy to do that. But there are also people who perhaps will always want to speak to somebody, and then there'll be a mid-category of people who will speak to somebody initially, but then start to realise that, when they speak to us, we're just confirming what they thought. And so we'll build up more confidence and start to self-help. But we see for the foreseeable future a hybrid model where we offer people both the opportunity to do things themselves, but also to have the ability to speak to one of our guys and ask them for confirmation or ask them for help as being the solution. But you're absolutely right. Those are the challenges for a business like this, because it is quite a fundamental change to say you don't march into somebody's office and sit down and say, here's where I am, what do I do? You try and reason your way through some of it yourself. It's a big change.
And it's already happened. In accounting, people use Xero and other platforms for small businesses that run their accounts, whereas 10 years ago you wouldn't have found anyone who was using a software platform like that as an SME. They would have had their accountant, or they would have done it themselves, or whatever it was. So I think the legal profession will get there, and it's going to be through the weight of all of these different businesses like us, pushing the envelope. And the more people have a positive experience with, and they realize, oh, wow, okay, so I spoke to someone, but I'd got it completely right. And I'd got it completely right based on, the information that was provided to me through this site and the documents. And so next time I actually don't need to call the person. I'm confident I can do it myself. And it goes back to that thing we were talking about, right at the start, about this paradigm shift in the, on the demand side, where hopefully in the next few years people will reach that point where it's just normal, and people say, oh yeah, I've signed up to the legal platform for SMEs, and that's just a normal thing for a small business to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to ask you both this question, and not so much about, well, it is about Sparqa, but really about all of your businesses. And I guess it's the advice part of these kind of case study sessions. And that is, if you're sitting listening now to this presentation, you've got a great idea, you want to do something about it, you think you've got some of the bits in place, but not all of them. Where do you go from here? Like as a serial entrepreneur or serial entrepreneurs, how do you start taking that idea, and you've done it and explained that you've done it kind of 2 or 3 times here now, and then advance it? What's the next step that you take?
That's a good question. So it's probably best to answer that from our experience. So I've had two parts to my sort of entrepreneurial life. So things I've done myself and things I've invested in.
Yep.
So where I've launched businesses, they've tended to be, say for one exception, they've tended to be in the legal sector, and based upon things I've learned during my legal career. So FromCounsel and CPDcast really came out of a need that I felt. So CPDcast was, well, I don't really want to go and sit and attend a physical conference to get my hours, as it were, and pay sort of £500 for a half-day conference, which number one takes me out of the office, but number two is just boring. Whereas if I could actually slot in much shorter sessions, in my day-to-day life, that would be much a better experience, but be much more convenient. So, well, how best can I do that? Well, actually, if I could just listen to something on my, probably those days thinking about my Walkman, but if I could just do it while I was, sort of on the train into work or whatever it might be. So it was very much that suits me. And then FromCounsel came out of, well, look, there's the services, the books are all old-fashioned, they're all out of date. You read a chapter and then you look at when it was published, say, well, now I've got to work out whether the law's changed since 1st of February last year and today, and that's useless. And whereas if I can access content on a digital service, there's no reason why it can't be up to date as at close of business yesterday. So again, I saw that as an obvious opportunity. And then for Sparqa, it was, well, I'm now sitting on some boards of small companies, and quite frankly, we need some help. We need some help on employment law. We need some help on our trademark stuff. We need some help on data protection. And why do we always have to go and instruct a very expensive lawyer and rack up thousands of pounds of fees for stuff that really ought to be available a lot cheaper? There's huge amounts of duplication. So those all came out as sort of practical areas. So then it became for me a question of, well, who do I need to help me to do this, and how do we pay for it? So I think if you know your sector and you know that there is an opportunity, it seems to me it's about, probably the most important thing is who you do it with. I mean, if you do it, running a business on your own would be, I've not done that. That must be incredibly challenging. And certainly I found that Stu talked a little bit when we talked about the FromCounsel content about the blend of experience. I find that just across the business. Stu and I have spent now many years debating these businesses and how we should do them. And I think you always end up at a better place having debated it with people whose judgment you trust and who get it, who get your vision. And then raising capital. Quite frankly, if you've got that, we've always self-financed. We've got a few guys that we've co-invested with a few times who have backed us, and we've put our own money in. So we haven't gone out for VC money for any of these businesses. But if you've got a really good idea, you know your sector, and you've got good people working with you, you're investable. I don't care what anybody else says. What, turning to now what I look for when I invest, it's all about investable people. So SwiftKey's probably the most successful exit for me. So I invested in that when it was 3 people, and we sold to Microsoft for the best part of $250 million. And that was about 2 guys who said, one guy was an AI PhD, and the other one was working for the civil service and was sitting in meetings for a big infrastructure project, and just watching people type with one finger on a phone trying to send emails, and said there's got to be a better way to do this. Spoke to his friend who happened to be an AI specialist and said, oh yeah, we could do this and this. And it was such an obvious solution, because for every lawyer, as they were starting to use Blackberries and so forth, taking way too long to type their messages, you can't possibly do it as quickly. I mean, now seeing how a younger generation can actually type as fast on a phone keyboard as I can on the hard keyboard, but that wasn't the position. So how can you make that experience quicker? So for me, that was an obvious solution, and the tech was really interesting, and the guys were really super smart. So for me, it was a really straightforward investment. So in terms of going back to your question, it strikes me that if you've got the right idea, it's a question of how you're going to execute it, who you're going to execute it with. And what we did with FromCounsel, and I think this is quite an interesting proposition, because we tend to be quite sort of single-minded about what we do. But with FromCounsel, we went and spoke to 3 major law firms. So Freshfields and Linklaters, which are London firms, and Skadden Arps, which is in London, but is essentially a New York firm. And we went along to them and said, look, we're thinking of doing this service. Can we just come and talk to you every few weeks and tell you what we're thinking, and get you to second guess our logic? So I think talking to people who know your sector is also a good idea. I found that people couldn't be happier than to talk to somebody who's got a good idea, and I think input from people who have relevant knowledge is incredibly important. And certainly all of our businesses, albeit you can see the sort of the idea that with FromCounsel and Sparqa I started with several years ago, the businesses as they are yes, they are sort of that vision, but they have been massively polished by input from other people. So I think ultimately people, I think, is the most important thing. Getting help and advice from people, and going into business with people who you trust and whose judgment you respect, and blending your talents with their talents. It's not a question of 1 + 1 = 2. In my experience, 1 + 1 = 3, and you end up with a better product and a better business. I can't really help on a one person doing things themselves, because I've never done that. I've never had the guts to do that. I think the number one thing is people, advice from third parties, and choosing the right partners, and sort of respecting each other's views, and also not falling out with them, because I mean, Stu and I have had over the years many heated discussions, but I think we respect each other's point of view, and know that when we stick to something, sometimes Stu will have a view on that I think's mad, and then because I trust his judgment and know that he knows what he's talking about, that means that we tend to say, well, let's reflect on this and let's come back and talk about it again tomorrow. And so I think that for me, it's people is the number one thing.
And I think just on the kind of getting a bit more granular on the interactions that you have with the market. I mean, obviously, the more people that you speak to that are potential consumers of your product, the better. I think what we found early on is that you get a lot of very forthright views about what your product should do, but they come from different people who have different, focuses and different wants and different needs. And so I think one of the really important things is that you obviously spread the net very wide, get a very wide array of different opinions about the sort of direction that your business could take. But there's got to be this pretty rigorous filtration process, so that you're not trying to do 500 things 300 of which won't work, or won't work as well as you think. You've got to focus on what you're good at. You've got to make decisions that are based on data. How many people have actually said that they want this, rather than, oh well, someone said they wanted this and sounds like a great idea. And I mean, we've learned that the hard way. We've made mistakes along the way with some of the things that we've deployed, but it's a good reminder for other people to to make sure that they're focusing on delivering a product that they can sell, and that they're managing that relationship between the cost of developing a product and how much you're getting in through the door when you sell it. So
yeah. And I think that just to sort of caveat what I said a moment ago, the other thing to be aware of is that sometimes you have to have the confidence that you actually see things differently and more innovatively than some of the people you talk to. So I always like that quote about, I think it was probably about Henry Ford, who said that when he built the first car, he said, well, if I'd have gone and spoken to the customers, they'd have just said they wanted a faster horse. And it's that sometimes, yes, you talk to people, but equally, if you've got a vision about something, sometimes you've got to just have the courage of committing to what you think you're doing, because that's how people move things forward. A lot of the stuff, when we were doing FromCounsel, people were partly saying to us, "You must be nuts," because Thomson Reuters have this market sewn up. They have 100% of all the leading firms. But we took the view that that they built a product that was fantastic for the 1990s, but 25 years on, we could do something better. And we had an opportunity to start with a blank piece of paper and not be forced to adapt a product that that was 25 years old, and therefore it couldn't be as agile, it couldn't be as developed as in an agile fashion in the same way that perhaps we could do. So we saw that as a bit of an advantage. Yes, we had to struggle to get people to buy our product in addition to that product, but we felt that we were able to move quicker and build something that was different and better than what they were able to offer.
Andy and Stu, unfortunately, I have to bring this to a close, but you've set the bar very high in terms of being our inaugural session, and we're very grateful to you for doing that. Thank you, and thank you to everyone who has attended as well. And we too would love your feedback about folks that you would like to hear from, and things that you would like us to focus on in this series as well. So with that being said, and again, with a huge thanks, Andy, enjoy your day. It's still ahead of you. We can tell you it's looking good. And Stu, thank you also very much.
Yeah, no problem. It's been a pleasure.
Much appreciated.
Thanks, Terri. It's been great.
Thanks again,
Thank
folks.
you.